Welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be installing a door with minimal disturbance to the wall. You may not be comfortable with your drywall skills. Maybe you're not wanting to tear out a lot of drywall. So I'm going to show you how you can install a door where you can just cut the opening the size it needs to be on the drywall and be able to insert everything you need from the outside. You could possibly do this with just hand tools, but it will be very difficult to do that. So I'll be using drill and power tools to do this. You have to start off by measuring out your rough opening. I'm installing a 32-inch door, so I will need to make my rough opening a little bit larger than the door to be able to fit the door jamb in and leave a little bit of wiggle room on either side to adjust the door, get everything in square and true, because you want the door to be square and both sides to be plumb, everything true, so that the door will swing properly and not bind up once we get it installed. So the rough opening needs to be 2 inches wider than your door measurement. For a 32-inch door, we'll need a 34-inch wide opening, and the height needs to be 2.5 inches taller than the door. So standard door height opening is 6 foot 8 inches is door height. Standard door height 80 inches. So we'll be making it 82.5 inches. This allows us to lift the bottom of the door about 1/2 inch to run the flooring under the door jamb, so that we can not have to just cut it off later. And also, if we did set it on the concrete, then cut the door jamb off, we would just be reducing the airspace under the door and reducing the airflow. In my case, someone else already started cutting this hole, so I am going to have a little bit of drywall work to do, but you'll see how you can avoid that. I'm going to have to put a 2x4 against this 2x4 because you have to have a short one here to put your header on. So we can't avoid that, but we can avoid that on the other side, and I'll show you how on the other side. Also, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but the old adage, measure twice, cut once. There are 2 lines here. When I checked my measurements, I had messed up, so I need to make sure I cut to this inside line. So I have a line, I've checked it, I've checked the measurements, I've made sure that it's all square and it's all plumb, and now I'm going to cut. You can cut this with a hand saw just as easily as this saw, or maybe not just as easily, but you can cut it with a hand saw. I'll be using this saw. One thing to make sure of is that you don't cut into electrical wires. So I have verified that there is not going to be a problem with that in this case. And with this tool, I'm not going to be cutting deep enough for that really to be a problem anyway. Okay, now that I've cut all the way around the perimeter, I can remove this section of drywall. As you can see, it comes out quite easily. Now that we have the opening in the drywall, or at least enough that we can access it, we need to cut these 2x4s out. And in this case, this wall is not load bearing, so I'm not concerned about that. And we are going to be putting a header in here, so I mean this will be a properly installed door. This is not going to be, I mean, you know, we could just throw in a 2x4 on either side and call it good, what some people would do. This is not the way I do things. So the next step is I need to mark on the side of these 2x4s, and I've got a piece of scrap wood with the mark at 3.5 inches. So I can hold that up in there for the mark so I can see it, and using the same saw, that's that vibrating saw. I'll change it to a different blade, but I can reach up in there and cut that at that point. And then when I turn the 2x4 sideways and put it inside the wall, cavity of the wall, it will bump up against those 2x4s that remain, and that will give us structural support between the header and the top plate of the wall. So we'll be good on that point. Adaptability is important for any project. First thing I discovered was this tool is too long to insert between two studs, so I put a shorter battery on it, and that almost gave me enough to cut the stud, but not quite. So I wound up pulling a nail on each side, and now I can move the stud, and then I can come at it at an angle, so I can attack the stud at an angle, and I have more room to get between them. And then this other one, I'll be able, once this one's cut off, this one won't be a problem. Now, if those were together, I would need to cut one of them just in the middle somewhere to do something like this, to get it started, to be able to do that. And of course, I'm only showing you the last little bit of that, so it was a little bit more work than that. These are old telephone wires, so I know what they are, and I know there's no electricity on them. Also, by the way, I make my living in low voltage, so I know for a fact. If you're uncertain about any wiring, please don't cut into it. Sometimes you have to break out a little elbow grease. Even my little reciprocating saw, or vibrating saw, whatever it's called, couldn't quite get all the way to the corners, so I had to get this little hand saw. Make sure you pull any nails. There was a nail here, and on the other side there was a nail about right here. And once the nails are out, there we have our rough opening. Next step after getting the opening cut in the drywall is to insert. Remember we have a stud on this side, but we need a stud on the other side. Normally this would be built when the wall was built, and the top plate and the bottom plate would be nailed into the stud. But what we're gonna have to do is toenail, or actually using screws, screw into the top and bottom plate. So this will go up into the wall, and we'll screw at an angle into the top plate, into the bottom plate. So we'll have to line this up with our opening, and then screw this in to get it secured in place. Place it in sideways. Then twist it. Line it up. I want it to fit snugly so that when I put the screws in place, it bears any weight that may be on it. Because even though it's not a load-bearing wall, there is weight from the drywall and the ceiling, and there is some weight on that plate of this, even though it's not load-bearing. Also, you can buy pre-cut studs that are 92 5/8 inches long. That's how long a stud is if you do the math on an 8-foot ceiling, and you subtract out for the drywall and add back in for the flooring and all those sorts of things, it comes up to 92 5/8 inches. I cut one at 92 5/8 inches, and it was just a little bit too short, so I had to cut this one to a little bit longer. So I don't know if these were originally hand cut or what the deal was, but I cut it a little bit longer so it would be a nice tight fit. Now all I have to do is use my drill to drive the screws in. I'm using a deck screw for this. It uses a Torx bit. It doesn't slip as easily as a Phillips head, so if you can, I would recommend you use something besides a Phillips for this, because we're going to have to reach up into the wall to get that top part done. Our 2x4 stud is now installed into the cavity. Notice I used a piece of scrap lumber, scrap 2x4. I pressed it against the stud and used that as a guide, making sure that I drove the stud into the cavity far enough that I can place one more 2x4 beside it. And that's important. We need one more short 2x4 beside this to hold the header up. You'll see that in a moment. So I'll go ahead and secure this with the screws. Normally the header would be assembled. We would have two 2x4s separated by 1/2 inch pieces of plywood or some other 1/2 inch thick piece of material. But in this case, if we did that, then it would cause this piece to be too long corner to corner. It would be too difficult to put it in place. So we're going to tap it all into place, line it all up just below the top wall cavity. Then we're going to screw it together, and then we're going to tap it up into the top wall cavity. Once it's into place, we can run screws in it like we would toenail it, run screws into it at an angle from the bottom, and then we can put our short studs under each end to support the header. So remember, this header will be putting pressure on the two remaining short pieces of the studs that we cut out earlier that will be between the header and the top plate. So those will carry any load and prevent that top plate from sagging. So here we go. And in my case, I have a wider opening, so it's a little bit easier, because otherwise I have to do it like, start it like this, but it would still be doable. It would just be a little bit more work to get it started. You see, that's what I would have to do. So. I want it to be as lined up as closely as possible when I put my screws in. And since both those were cut the same, the first one put enough pressure on it that the second one went in quite a bit easier. So now I'm just going to use a piece of the sheetrock as a separator. Make sure that everything's lined up, and I'll drive some screws into it. And that's probably a lot more than it needs. Now that our opening of the drywall is cut in, we have the stud in place, we have the header in place. We cut a short stud. This was 81 1/4 to fit into this pocket and support the short to go under the header. And all I'll do is screw those to the other stud. Same thing on this side, you can see it better. Line it up. Remember, my hole was already cut at this point, so I'm going to have to come back and patch this. But if you did yours from the beginning, you would not have this extra piece that you have to patch. But you can also, this also allows you to see what's going on a little better. So we have this stud that's the same as the one we installed inside the wall on this side. Then we have the short one that's going here to hold the header up. And all we have to do is screw that and I'll do the same thing on the other side. The only thing that then is left is to take a handsaw or sawzall and cut the trim and the bottom plate, the 2x4 for the bottom plate, off so that we can remove that. And there it is. One rough opening with minimal damage to the wall. If we had started with our own opening, we really wouldn't have any drywall finishing to do. We still need to put some screws in around the edges, and we would just need to put a little bit of mud over those screws. That's not really a big deal at all. But other than that, that's all there is to it. You want the screws to go in just far enough that there's a slight dimple so that we can put some drywall mud or lightweight spackling or lightweight, basically some mud over it to get a smooth feel. So that's it. I just do that all the way around, and we'll have this project completed as far as the rough opening is concerned. Of course, installing the door is another matter, and that will be the subject of another video. Thank you for tuning in. Come back for the next installment.